Okay, welcome, Bob Osborne. Bob, thank you for joining us today. Bob has written an amazing award-winning book, sold out, completely sold out. So it's on for a reprint at the moment, and an award-winning film of the same name, Zennor, where he lives, and about his home, which was previously the home of DH Laurence, and also sort of the haunt of his friends, including sort of the Aleister Crowley, So, but you have such a fantastic, sort of fascinating story. To this point, I'll have to put the links to your great 5 interviews of the sum of the background into your story that you did with Miles from the Basis Project, and I'll put those into the box below, so everyone can just go and take a look at those. And I'll have links about Bob and his Rebel Not Taken brand too. So look, welcome Bob. Would you like to sort of introduce yourself and give us a brief synopsis of you being here right now? So thank you very much, Bob.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me on, Josie. And yeah, you've said some, pretty much the skeleton of what's going on. But I live in a very mysterious place called Zennor, which is just beyond St Ives, on the coast, on the remote part of Cornwall. And I live on the commune, or on the farm, where during the First World War, DH Laurence came here to set up a commune. So I'm a literature student and a poet, as well as an artist. And so I decided to research Laurence. And where I live, I don't know if any of your people know Zennor, but it's really a very, very strange place. So when I started researching Laurence, I went down lots and lots of rabbit holes to do with occultism, black magic, the paranormal. In fact, the first 2 lines of my book are, despite having the most romantic place name in the world, Zennor has always been a centre for paranormal activity. And that's exactly what it is. So I wrote this book having done a whole winter of research into my own experiences, as well as all the other experiences of the artists that have lived on this farm throughout the 20th century. And it just was one endless rabbit hole, which involved Aleister Crowley, the Nazis, ley lines, the St Michael line, lots of witchcraft. So mermaids as well, the mermaid myth. So I wrote this book, and within 3 months it sold out. I mean, it is of huge local interest. And, I've been in, I also made a documentary film called Zennor, Spirit of Place, which was based on the research in the book, but, quite an entertaining film, just tapping into the, a bit of a romp through all these activities that took place in Zennor throughout this, the period of the 20th century right up till now. So the book, I'm going to do a reprint. I'm going to publish a paperback edition because there's still quite a lot of demand for it. And I've done various podcasts with, with Miles Johnston, as you know, regarding my childhood, paranormal activity, the strange things that have happened to me, especially regarding where I now live in Zennor. The documentary film has been hugely successful too. It's won awards at Berlin Film Festival, Portobello Film Festival. So it's it's made on a no budget with a handheld camera. So I was delighted that was my first venture into documentary filmmaking. So the two side by side have aroused quite a lot of interest. So that's pretty much where I am with the book and the film. I think you wanted to talk about mermaids. Is that correct?
I do. Although I'll just because people will kick me if I don't say something about I suppose I've started looking at the likes of Genus Locii novels, and he was dealing with was it the whole sort of German side of things and the occult, which it's fascinating to read. So I've dipped my toe in it, and it's gripping kind of stuff. But I don't think we'll have time to cover it today, but it is fascinating stuff. But I'll just acknowledge that that would be another really great conversation, Bob. But
yeah,
please tell us about mermaids. What contact have you had with the fairy and mermaids in Zennor? I mean, sort of, you get these pictures, sort of evocative images of mermaids, sort of, sort of sitting on warm rocks, sort of combing their hair and sort of and being sort of seductresses, so what was your contact with regards to mermaids? Did you see them? Did you get an impression with them, or do you get, I mean, did you physically actually see a mermaid, and what did they look like?
Well, Zennor really is the centre of mermaid mythology for one obvious reason, to do with the mermaid of Zennor. But my own experience has been phenomenal over the last 4 years, and it's one where I've almost like been trapped into this archetypal web of mermaid symbology. And as you might know from one of the pictures, I've got a mermaid tattooed on my arm. I've got Zennor tattooed on my arm. So the minute I set foot here 4 years ago, although I have lived here before, my family actually lived in Zennor from around 1500. So my DNA is completely trapped into or representative of the consciousness, or the atmosphere of Zennor and the mythology. So as regards to mermaids, well, just to fill you in briefly about the mermaid of Zennor, there's a church called Saint Zennor, which is just across the field from me, which is a very ancient church, probably built in the 6th century. And Saint Zennor is the saint of Zennor, and it comes from Aleister, who was a Breton princess who was falsely accused of adultery by her Breton king husband. While she was pregnant, she put into an upturned barrel and floated out to sea, and she washed up at Zennor. And then subsequently she went on to Ireland. So that's the basis of the mermaid of Zennor myth.
Wow. So, just on the Irish thing, that would be I wonder where she ended up in Ireland. We have in Ireland we have sort of carvings. You showed some fantastic carvings in the church. We have carvings of mermaids in churches too here in Ireland. In fact, we have some in the inland areas, off beside the river Shannon, sort of, and we've got, so that's kind of an anomaly. And we also have sort of mermaid tales in around sort of I think it's the sort of the West Cork kind of area, but those are sort of maritime, where it's I suppose they're called selkies, where it's seal women that have, they've taken their seal skin off and then they've been captured, and the man sort of takes the woman for his wife and hides her seal skin so she can't return to the sea until, of course, she finally finds it, and then she's gone. So what is the mythology there with regards to mermaids? Is apart from Aleister, is there other mermaids? Is there a colony of mermaids there, or is that where? So how was it left? What is the story there over and above Aleister?
Well, when the myth developed, as you say, that there's a great interplay between Celtic, the influence of Celtic, Ireland, Brittany, and Cornwall, of 3 very Celtic nations, and how the mermaid myth developed was that in the 15th century there was a carved chair that represented Aleister, or the mermaid of Zennor. Now, the mermaid of Zennor, the myth that developed was that she enticed a boy, a chorister from who used to sing in the Zennor church, called Matti Trahella. And of course, mermaids were, linked to shape shifting, and the fact that they were cast out into the sea. And there's also pagan mythology about them escaping the sun god, and then of course the Greek Aphrodite. There's representations of mermaids of the goddess of love, and that they could only then remove their tail and remove to land if they enticed a man and married a man and then became human again. So to a certain extent, that there's an aquatic vampirism to do with mermaids that can be both good and bad. And this particular mermaid, the story, which is a very big story, and of course a lot of people come to Zennor and they come and stay in my farm, and the first thing they want to do is to go to see the mermaid chair. And this is a beautifully carved piece of wood, with the mermaid holding a mirror, which is a sign of vanity, and a comb. So the story was that this beautiful stranger, mysterious stranger, was in the church and was listening to Matti Trehella, who was a local boy, and was so enticed by his singing. And the thing about mermaids is that there's a lot of it is done through sonic mesmerism. So the way that dolphins and whales have communicate through sound, and I think there's elements where the mermaid, the noises that the mermaids emit, the almost the heavenly spooky sounds, are one that entices the brain. So a lot of sailors traditionally would view mermaids as could either be good or bad. But in Matti Trehella's case, he fell in love with or was enticed by this mermaid, who then would shapeshift, take him down to a local cove, which is called Pendur Cove, which is the local cove to me, and it's where I go to swim, and it's the most mystical, amazing cove just down from Zennor Head, and I can actually walk to it from my farm. And he went down to the cove, was never to be seen again. So clearly, either at that time the boy was abducted. Now there's also elements of shape-shifting mermaids and time loss experiences that could almost be like similar to experiences by UFO abductees. There's that same loss of consciousness and going into a trance-like state. And Matti Trehella was never seen again, but the story was that if you go down to Pendur Cove, which I do on many occasions, you can still hear the songs of Matti Trehella and the mermaid coming out to sea. And another link is between the Greek mythology about the sirens, and the sirens was another form of the mermaid archetype, where they were half bird, half human, and of course they were very malevolent. And there's a thing about sailors, fishermen, sailors notoriously superstitious. So depending on which side of the mermaid you're on, your fortunes will be decided. So the whole myth about Matti Trehella has personal resonance to me, because not only do I live near Pendur Cove and I swim in that cove, and quite often I've felt the lure to swim out into the ocean and have to resist it because the riptides around here are very dangerous. But I quite often take people swimming in that cove and they see the chair. And really, Zennor is one of those places that's not just the mermaid, but is also the other witchcraft, and the whole connection with DH Laurence and Aleister Crowley, of course, is another layer of intrigue. But what's really strange about the mermaid here, and my own personal experience of it, which is one of many personal experiences that I've had at Zennor, is that about 2 years ago, when I was researching the mermaid and incorporating it into my other occult and paranormal research, I was on Instagram and I just felt compelled to get this tattoo of a mermaid on my arm. And also it links very much into my Rebel Not Taken background. So, if you don't know anything about that, my ancestors in 1685 tried to overthrow the monarchy. So we were branded as Rebel Not Taken by Judge Jeffrey. So one of the archetypes that has always inhabited me has been the sense of mermaids, pirates, rebels, because one of my ancestors' colleagues in this mutiny was Dr. Peter Blood. He was captured and sent to the Caribbean as a slave, but because he was a dignity, he wasn't hung, drawn, and quartered like some of my ancestors were. So he escaped and became Captain Blood, Pirates of the Caribbean. So growing up, because my interest in DNA and how DNA can attach itself to certain spirits of place, or genus loci, which, as an Irish person, I'm sure you're well aware. When I first came to Zennor, what I tapped into and what was kind of dominating a lot of people coming to visit me and my own thought processes and my dreams was the mermaid archetype. So when I came here, I bought this fabulous farm, or it was transferred to me from a white witch called Betsy, the Fairy Queen, who became a friend of mine. And outside of one of the little cottages here, there's a mermaid statue. which I was told that I shouldn't ever move, and I haven't moved it out as a point of superstition. So I think there's a photograph of this little statue, and it's always been there, and it kind of guards this cottage. And a couple of years ago, when I posted a picture on Instagram, when I said that I was starting to research mermaids, I had a message from a lady who said, "Do you live in Zennor?" And I said, "Well, yes, I do." And she said, "Well, will you meet me at the Tinner's Arms?" Now, the Tinner's Arms is the local pub, which is historically a very important pub for many reasons, apart from the fact that it butts onto the church, and it's got its own hauntings. And it was also the pub where DH Laurence came during the First World War, where lots of artists drink. And there's a whole mythology about the ghosts in the Tinner's Arms. So I met her in the Tinner's Arms, and she told me that she was researching her family tree. So I said, "Well, that's interesting." And she said she's got to a gap in Zennor where she can't get any further. And when I saw this lady, she was, I've got to say, very attractive. She had blonde curly hair and green eyes, just like the depictions of the mermaid that you see in representations. They can be quite alluring. And I asked her what the problem was and what her surname was. And she said her surname, Cornish surname, was Tregerthen. Well, Tregerthen was the name of the boy, Matty Tregerthen, who was abducted by the mermaid in ancient times, which led to the Mermaid of Zennor myth. Now, what's even crazier is that I said, "You need to come back to my farm, because when you come back to my farm, I'll give you the missing link that you've been looking for." So, unbeknown to her, when I went through the deeds of my farm, going back from 1700, when it was built, up until 1964, it was lived in by descendants of the Tregerthen family. So Matty Tregerthen, as a boy who was either abducted by witches or by aliens or by the mermaids. Sometimes the Cornish and the Celts create fables, as stories to cover, what really went on. But it turns out that, this lady was descended from Tregerthen, and when she walked into my courtyard and she saw the little mermaid statue outside my cottage, she almost went into a kind of trance-like state. And she said, "I can't believe this." She said, "I've just had the most incredible experience of deja vu." And I showed her the deeds, and she went away and said that it had a profound experience of her, and she would come back and do the rest of the research at some time. But that's just another example of mermaid synchronicity. In terms of Jungian synchronicity, if you are inhabited by an archetype, or you understand an archetype, you'll find that things will recur all the time. It's almost like another deja vu. And only 2 weeks ago, I had an art critic came to interview me about my book in one of the galleries in St Ives. And he's been here before. And he said, "I'm coming to interview you, and I want to interview you in Zennor, in Tregerthen, which is the tiny hamlet that I live in, where the Tregerthen family lived." And when he came, he's a very kind of, sane art critic. He said, "I've just had an absolute obsession about getting a mermaid tattoo on my arm, and I want it to be tattooed in Zennor." Well, one of my daughter's boyfriends is a tattoo artist, so he came and then he got a tattoo artist of a mermaid on his arm. So there's lots of little things like that, and I've been given other mermaid statues, and so when I'm looking out my kitchen window now at the cottage, I've got that little mermaid, a beautiful little statue that's guarding there. I've got another mermaid outside my main barn here, and I think that there's a duality, or there's a concept that you need to keep on side with these spirits, like fairies and mermaids, because they can either work for good or bad. And when you talk about, there is a malevolent side to mermaids, because obviously Matty Tregerthen was abducted, and fishermen do have a fear of mermaids because they think they can be dragged out to sea, and if they then follow the mermaid, or follow the siren, or follow the fake catch of fish, there's lots of incidences of fishermen drowning here. And I think it was even up until the last century, there's reports of fishermen having sightings of mermaids in Pendor Cove, the very cove that in medieval times or pre-medieval times, Matty Tregerthen was lost. And it's not just Zennor here, but the whole area. There's reputed to be a mermaid in Lamorna. Lamorna is another very spooky little fishing village on the south coast, and there's a mermaid that supposedly sat on what's now called Mermaid's Rock there, and would lure fishermen in to have their boats dashed on the rocks. So the suspicion was that that there's a malevolent side to mermaids, and of course abducting men, in order for them to recover their balance or overcome their alien-like existence to get back to a human existence. They need to abduct a man, and then lots of men are suspicious of that. There's another incident of go on, Josie.
That's fascinating, because I hear also about sort of mermaid colonies, that there are mermaid colonies that sort of live together, but I'm just trying to sort of get it. We have an interview with somebody that's very connected with the mermaids too next week, so that's going to be fascinating. But I'm interested to know what these mermaids look like. I mean, was it in Ireland? We have the same symbology. I mean, where we have mermaids carrying the mirror and the comb, and and there's some debate. A great friend of mine wrote a book about mermaids a number of years ago, and he would call them grotesques, whereas I would sort of say something completely different. I said that they were more like beacons of light, on the rocks, to warn the fishermen, the sailors, of the rocks underneath. So, but the sea does seem to be it seems to be the sea itself that seems to allure people sort of to just give up the struggle and just fall into the sea. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot that needs to be kind of unpacked. So but it's a lot of questions there. I suppose whenever we're all looking for something sort of very tangible, sort of for that moment of illumination and understanding with regards to what it is that who they are. So so yeah,
that's very interesting that you've said illumination, because when we're talking about the duality or the dual aspect of not just mermaids but fairies too, and other paranormal activities, there is this duality there. And another instance of an artist writing about the mermaids here at Tregerthen is there's some cottages down the lane from me, and there was a poet called John Heath Stubbs who lived here in the 40s and 50s. I mean, where I am, which is still technically a commune, is always been lived by artists and occultists. So that level of paranormal activity and psychic activity is really embedded in the stones, which is what Laurence tapped into, this blood consciousness that is in the granite. And of course, granite has quartz, which stores memory. But John Heath Stubbs wrote a very fine poem called "To the Mermaid of Zennor," and it really did focus on the malevolent aspects of the mermaid mythology. And I think there's a picture there that I've sent of a Gothic mermaid, which is really some he called the mermaid of Zennor half fish, half fallen angel. So there are people believe that these entities are fallen angels, and he also called her a sea hag. So that's one of the darker aspects of mermaids. But what it represents to a certain extent is that traditionally mermaids were representing Christ as well. The dual aspect of the human and the divine, of the man and the beast, of the sun and the moon, of the sea and the land. The dark and the light. And certainly a lot of other research I've done regarding Luciferianism and the Illuminati, in the sense that there's always this dual aspect, and you can't really have one without the other. So you in terms of Luciferian belief systems, which inform a lot of what's been going on at the moment with the United Nations and things like that, and the New World Order, which is based on Luciferian principles, is that you can't have light without dark. So the fact that you mentioned mermaid as a illumination is very relevant, because I think it's the choice you make, how you perceive this. And it's almost like if you get trapped into the web of dark mermaid mythology or dark fairy mythology, which can go into devil worship, or you stick into the you look at it as a good thing. I think that's kind of choice we have to make, really. And I think we're always given this duality or these choices to make, these paths to walk down. And that's why, as I think I've said in Miles's interviews that I've done with him, in the sense that because I've come from a Romany gypsy background and with a lot of psychic behavior, I'm very aware not to ever use these things for bad or manipulative purposes, because I think then it kind of it bounces back on you. So that whole thing about the mermaid, there's a dual aspect to them, and you have to kind of be aware that one influences the other, and it depends on what timeline you go on, or how you attach yourself to, or they attach themselves to you.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Sort of, and I suppose I view them with such. I cherish them, to be honest. I think that they're just lovely. I think they're marvelous, as beautiful creatures. Really, sort of absolutely stunning. But I mean, I suppose, like you're saying, that kind of reflects who she is too. So and she does bring that out in people. So that's what basically that's what she's seeing. That's maybe what the mirror is. Is if you put out that kind of positivity, that's what you're going to get back. So. Maybe that's what the mirror is. I mean, I do hear you sort of, the other image is with the comb, and sort of about detangling and so forth. I mean, there's so much mythology with regards to fishermen and sort of deep sea sort of sailing. I mean, I know a few fishermen, and they'd had scary times and they have all of these sort of things that they don't do, like they don't pick up a needle. If they see a needle or a comb on the ground, they'll never pick it up, so because if you pick up a needle, especially one that doesn't belong to you, you'll have need of a needle. So, and some of these guys will say that there were tens, maybe hundreds of miles away from a coastline, and somebody will get on to the boat in the middle of the night and run around the boat, so and there's all kinds of unexplainable sort of activities that happen out at sea that just couldn't, our faces pressed up against the windows, so terrifying really, but it's interesting to hear these stories.
Well, that's true. I mean, fishermen are notoriously superstitious, and I guess if every night you're taking your life in your hands to a certain extent, it's a risky occupation. And I've quite often gone out with the fishing boats with fishermen in Newlyn and Mousehole, and the three centres where probably the mermaid mythology is apart from Zennor is around Newlyn and Mousehole Harbour, where they've had a lot of sightings of and superstitions about mermaids. And when I was out with a fisherman about 20 years ago, we used to go out on this boat, and it was in the summer. And I just, to be honest, I didn't really want to go fishing. I just wanted to use it to go swimming in the ocean. So I would jump off the boat and go swimming in the ocean. And these fishermen couldn't understand why I would want to go down into that dark pit, because lots of fishermen notoriously don't swim or can't swim. They're actually frightened of what's down there, which could also be a metaphor for your subconscious. And lots of the fishermen that I was friendly with, wouldn't eat fish. They just didn't want to eat it. I suppose if you're catching it and gutting it all day, you don't. But so to a certain extent, there's that dichotomy between what you perceive to be a beautiful ocean and a dark pit down there. And I'm also interested in the fact that it could be some kind of throwback to alien species and hybrids, because this part of Cornwall is very big on hybrids and shape shifting and things like that. So the tradition was that these mermaids could come into a fishing village or come into a church like the mermaid of Zennor did, and just act as normal women, and then suddenly shapeshift into their legs become a tail, and they can inhabit two worlds to a certain extent, so they can straddle that world, and then they're hybrids. And I've also seen in Gurnard's Head, which is just down the coast from Zennor, I've seen a woman shapeshift into a crow. I've been there, and other people have seen it as well. So it's a very common mythology around here, and of course once you tap into this mythology, and once you see it once, you tend to see it repeatedly. So both Newlyn and Malso also have their traditions of mermaids, and they've got particular rocks where they say that mermaids have been seen sitting. So I think over the centuries, people make of it what they will, but also there's that whole thing about, I think, the CIA and certainly, one of my other interests apart from the occult is espionage, and I think that certainly what's been going on with the Chinese and a lot of research or experiments on the human form and the hybrid form is that they can now create mermen or mer people who can survive a lot longer underwater than most humans. In fact, they can virtually live underwater now with adapted lungs and things like that. So this whole link between mermaids probably existed before we came out of the sea, and maybe we get throwbacks to them and genetic throwbacks, and so the whole thing is entirely fascinating, as you know.
Have you seen any fairies, and what has your communication been? In fact, how have you asked the likes of the fairies for help in Zennor? You'd mentioned that you'd spoken to them, or you'd been in communication with both, and that they helped you in some sort of a way. How did that work?
Yes, they had a major benefit to me, actually. Fairies, as I said before, with there's a lot of interaction between Celtic mythology and mythology down here in Zennor or Cornwall. So there's all kinds of fairies that are peculiar to this particular part. Apart from we have knockers, spriggans, piskies, booker. So there's whole kind of hierarchies of fairy spirits or fairy entities. And just briefly, the booker, which is a sea deity, that again can come into a good and bad, because there's the booker widden and the booker do. So there's a white version of a sea entity and a black version, and I think that again, if you get the good version, you get bountiful pilchards, you don't get storms, but it can suddenly turn, and the weather down here can suddenly turn from glorious sunshine to darkness in a matter of seconds, and the whole mood changes. So a lot of these booker sea spirits were, it's called booker calling, and people did think that they had some impact on the weather. So fishermen would traditionally leave after they catch, they'd leave 3 fish on the beach. Again, Christian symbology with the number 3, which is a pagan number, and the Father, the Spirit, and the Holy Ghost. So you get bookers, then you get knockers as well, and knockers really are akin to the Irish leprechauns. I've kind of lived in Ireland, so it's not just being in Cornwall that I've been aware of the little people and all these things. When you only have to immerse yourself in Irish conversation, Irish culture, to realise that this is very part of people's psyche. And the fairies, the fairy that I had the influence with was a piskie. Now the piskies, again, are very local to here. The Cornish piskies, you see them in all the little antique shops and things like that. And traditionally, they're thought to be the spirits of dead pagans or druid ancestors who are kind of stuck in limbo between heaven and hell. So they're notorious for leading people astray, and it's called being piskie led. So quite often people say that they get lost or they've taken a wrong turn in, and this happens all the time, especially up on the moors here at Zennor, where there's a lot of belief that there's certain guardian piskies that control the moors. So the experience that I've had as well would have been walking on the moors, just that you decide to go in another direction than the one that you were going, and the locals here think that's because the piskies are leading you astray. So they can either lead you down the right path or the wrong path, and these piskies are about a foot to 18, 1.5 foot, and they traditionally live in colonies near the cliffs and the beaches, and a lot of them, they dress in almost like Celtic Iron Age costumes. So, there's been lots of sightings of piskies. But the sighting I had here at Tregerthen in Zennor was there's a little what's called a fairy pool just down by Tregerthen Cove. And when I was living here 4 or 5 years ago with Betsy, the fairy queen, who wrote the Tregerthen Song, it was her family that lived here before. And we did various covenants between us that if I was to take over this farm, because other people tried to buy it, but she wanted it to pass on, through that psychic connection to a certain extent, that spirit connection, because all my daughters are artists, and we were going to carry on running it as an art colony and as a retreat for people who wanted to do yoga or spiritual or just explore mermaid myths and things like that. So we did the ceremony down, and she said, let's go down to the fairy pool. And there's a rock pool down there, which is on the path that I go down to the cove sometimes to swim. And I've always thought it was a magical place. And I went down there with her and my daughter. And at the time, I needed to get £1 million quite quickly in order to transfer ownership of this place to me. And I had no idea how I was going to do it. I know that sounds a bit mercenary, and you're coming into the capitalist world there, but sometimes needs must. And she said, well, let's go down and we'll summon a fairy. And I was kind of a bit dubious. I said, well, okay, let's go and do it. So we went down to this little rock pool, and then sure enough, she did some chanting. I think it's called light language, which I know that other people have done, because I've had other people like Andrea Folks does that, who and she's come here and done light language. And then sure enough, I saw some little entities or little fairies literally dancing on this rock pool, and these creatures were about 4 inches high, literally little gossamer wings, almost like dragonfly, large dragonflies, but almost like a human baby, or child, very innocent, and they were just literally floating on the surface. And both me and my daughter were absolutely staggered, and my eyes were popping out, and I'm watching this. And then we did some agreements that Tregerthen, the farm here would pass into me, over to my family from Betsy's family, and that more or less we then made some other arrangements in that I should always keep the swallows in the barn that come up from Africa every year. I shouldn't use the property or sell the property for profit or for anything other than to keep it as a magical retreat, which it always has been, and it is now. So after that, I did feel quite a sense of lightness, and I've seen lots of orbs and things like that, but this is the first time I've ever experienced this. Literally, these tiny little, and they weren't like pixies. There was no doubt at all that there was nothing suspicious about their activities, because the pixies and the spriggans have got a very bad reputation. There's spriggans that live up on Tregerthen Hill, which is just up above Zennor, and they're notorious for guarding the ancient treasures. So the spriggans are almost like they're the minders of the pixies. So the pixies can quite often are harmless, but the spriggans can be malevolent if you get on the wrong side of them. So when people go up onto the moors and they try to remove rocks or there's instances of Zennor Court when somebody tried to remove a boulder, a farmer, and then of course bad things happen to him. And traditionally, these rocks then go back next day. So the spriggans are the protectors of the pixies, and they're traditionally, the ghosts of the ancient giants. Now Cornwall, is one of those places that does have this massive belief in giants, and I think this is not just confined to Cornwall. All the cities and the great big structures up there, the Bronze Age, pre-Bronze Age settlements, all these stones are not randomly, it's not a force of nature that these stones are there. They've been like architecturally built, along with obviously all the other things you mentioned, like Stonehenge, the pyramids. And so the spriggans notoriously protect these stones, it's in these glades and these fujus and these burial chambers where the various the pixies, the spriggans, the knockers, all kind of live, and it's almost like there's an underground world there, and the fujus are these underground caves that the whole structure of them up on the moors, where you can feel as though you're being sucked into them if you go there. So the spriggans are notorious for if people go with bad intentions, the spriggans are brought into play. And of course, this is also reflects a bit to my DNA in the sense that my great uncle was called George the Giant Augur, and it's well documented that he was in the freak shows. He was Queen Victoria's bodyguard, and he was my mother's uncle. And I've done a lot of research into him. And at the time in 1900, he was the second tallest man in the world. Then he became Jack and the Beanstalk on the stage in New York. So I've always had this this giant archetype as well in my DNA and in my consciousness and in my dreams. And so I'm trying to write a book about him. But there's also the other suggestion, which when the BBC interviewed me about him, because he then went to be in the silent movies with Howard Lloyd, and I got photographs of him with Charlie Chaplin, and I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, this is a Nephilim throwback. So the whole thing about the giants, again, it can go back to people know what the Nephilim was, which is the fallen angels who bred with human women, and then of course created giants, and a lot of that taps into the Atlantis, things like that. So the whole Atlantis mythology again is one that's very personal to Cornwall, and also the mermaids. There's this whole culture, whole civilization of all these really otherworldly creatures, if you want to put it, that can be both agents for good and bad. So this whole mythology here with pixies, with knockers, with spriggans, with mermaids. I mean, the whole area, the whole coastline is infused with it. All the stones are infused with this the DNA of ancient DNA of these people, and I certainly feel it, in my DNA, which goes back many generations before it's degraded. It's almost like you get attachments of these archetypes or these experiences. Like anyone who's done time traveling or rescinded into past lives, as I've done, it's sort of like we're inhabiting two worlds. There's the little world that we inhabit materially, and then of course there's the other world, which often could be when you go to sleep, you go to other places, and you can travel to other dimensions. And I think once you become aware of this and you are open to these things, and of course a lot of the Celtic races are, especially the Irish, very open to these things. I mean, I've had Irish girlfriends, and I've lived in Ireland, and I certainly, this whole thing about spirit of place is really what informed my book, because if you can go to some places and tap into this genus loci, this spirit, and then if you can attach yourself to it or allow it to attach itself to you, all these strange experiences happen, and that's what's happened here. So that's why I wasn't at all surprised that I saw those little fairies, and that my daughter saw them as well, and that Betsy had summoned them up. And of course she wrote the song here that we used in the soundtrack for the film, which was called the Tregerthen Song. And Tregerthen in Cornish means land of the rowan. Now this part of Cornwall is not that well known for rowans, because it's very exposed to the wind and the elements, but there are rowans here at Tregerthen. And of course the rowan was an antidote to witchcraft. So where we are now, up on the hills, just like 50, 100 yards from me, was a place called Burns Down, where was traditional a moot of midsummer witches. And they took the Victorians took the stones away because the Methodists tried to declare war on the pagans and stop witchcraft. So there's still lots of witches working in Zennor, and traditionally Zennor was one of the main centres of witchcraft. So the fact that this is all in the land and it emanates out from the rocks and out from the oceans, and it can be summoned by people, is no surprise to me. And subsequent to that, going back into the material world, after my interaction with these fairies, I just said, look, I'm just going to let the universe decide whether I can raise £1 million or not. And so then I did various calls to a hedge fund manager, because it was when they were locking everybody down. There was nobody borrowing money, and to my surprise, they said, yes, we can lend you £1 million. And I had no record of ever having worked. I've been an artist all my life, albeit very had some success and very fortunate with money because of my gypsy magic. So this transpired, and then suddenly it all happened, and then I was £100,000 short to pay the stamp duty fine, because they gave me on paper £1 million. So I said, look, I'm £100,000 short. This deal's never going to happen. And Betsy said, oh, well, let's keep the faith. The fairies have decreed it. So this sounds really weird, because we're slipping from a metaphysical world of fairies into a world of high finance here. But I've lived in both those worlds, so I'm happy in both of them. So as it turns out, on the day that we were due to complete this deal, I'd gone to my solicitor in Truro, and I was going to say, look, I'm sorry, I haven't got £100,000 stamp duty, but you do the deal, and just let me try and find the rest of the money in a month or two if I can. And he said, well, we need your passport now to make sure you're not a money launderer. So I took my passport in, and he said, your passport's expired. So he said, we can't verify you because your passport's expired. So I said, give me 2 days. So I went to London, phoned the passport office, told them that I was, in this predicament, that I was going to lose this property, and that I needed a new passport. Well, I spoke to the right person, somebody who I didn't expect at all to anyone to be helpful. And he said, don't worry, we'll carry it over to you tomorrow. So I got my passport. I drove back through the night to Truro, where my solicitor was. 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm sleeping on the bench outside his office with my new passport. And he said to me, you must be the luckiest man alive. I says, why is that? He said, well, because on the day that you left, we gave you 2 days grace. The day that you left to go to London, we were going to complete on Tregerthen Farm. The Chancellor, Sunak, had got up in the Commons and said there's a stamp duty holiday on properties over £500,000 in Cornwall. So I had a stroke. My £90,000 was saved, and I only had to pay a duty of £10,000. So he said, well, how did you know? I said, I didn't know. I said, I didn't have the money either. So I just I threw myself to the fate of the fairies, and he, of course, thought I was completely mad. And anyway, he was scratching his head, and then, of course, then it was done. And I just put it all down to the fact that the luck was with me. And I've always had that belief, because, growing up with where I grew up, my grandmother was a Romany gypsy. My father was one of 18. None of them could read or write, but they all had like certain skills, like psychic skills. So, my father and some of his brothers didn't use those skills for good intentions. They became criminals and murderers, and they were in prison. But my grandmother told me that she would pass on the gift to me, which is also the gift of second sight, because she knew that I wouldn't use it for bad intentions. So I've always maintained that as long as I don't use any psychic abilities for bad intentions, it'll always work out well for me. So that's a bit of a long story, but
no, that's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so how can I learn from what you're talking about here? How do we tap into the Genus Locii, and how do we connect with it, and how do we ask it to help us? And also, I'm really interested in your gypsy luck. How do we get a wee bit of that gypsy luck on our side too? So
I can sell it to you. No. Yeah. The first one, how do we tap into it? Well, yeah, that's difficult. I use what's called an analeptic process to do my work, which is my work as a poet, as an artist. I've now come to realize it's an analeptic process, and it was taught to me or explained to me, or I divined it from a poet called Robert Graves, who I knew in 1976. And effectively what it is that rather doing the scientific method of what's called remote viewing, which can be trained, and which intelligence agencies do train psychics to remote view. This is a much more of a poetic, and it's based on some Celtic belief systems in the muse and the power of the muse. So, as far as Robert Graves was concerned, he wrote a book called The White Goddess, which is, along with Fraser's The Golden Bough, one of the Bibles of neo-paganism and Druidism, and it effectively is how to tap into a lot of it's based on gods and goddess worship. I'm a bit suspicious about any of those terms because it's got New Age connotations that I'm not exactly sure are on the right path, because a lot of New Age has been infiltrated by Luciferian belief systems. So the whole thing about illumination and awakening and at the age of Aquarius, of course, as far as I'm concerned, is a complete false light. But the analeptic process suggests that once you can escape the linear time barrier, and often you can do it when you're in a trance-like state. Now, there's various ways that you can do this. I've used various methods. I mean, I've dabbled with hallucinogenic drugs, certainly when I was younger, and that's one method to do it, which was more or less taken up by the likes of Aldous Huxley and the Beat Generation and the CIA and MK Ultra. I've spoken to Miles about that. Another way is sex magic, which is a method used by biggest proponent of that, of course, is Aleister Crowley, who was very active here. I've also indulged in sex magic rituals, and I found that you can raise Kundalini or raise prana, which gets you into an altered state that way as well. The other way is just by literally having a muse, and often the spirit of place, or the landscape, the ocean. If you're attached to one particular place, that can be your muse. So when I found out that my ancestors were actually here 500 years ago, and I've now been made the Earl of Tregerthen by King Arthur Pendragon, who's the reincarnation of King Arthur, on the very spot where my ancestors had a tin mine and a castle in 1500. The whole thing about spirit of place is that I can quite easily tap into this the spirit of place in Zennor, because my DNA is very much here. And also the fact that then when I'm researching someone like DH Laurence, who came in and also tapped into the genus loci of Zennor, this is why he said this was the promised land, and his Shangri-La. The fact that I've also could tap into DH Laurence, because not only from a literary point of view, having studied his work, but where he tended his vegetables is where now I tend my vegetables. Where he walked and swam in Wicker Pool is where I swim. So it's almost like you occupied the physical space that person has occupied, and then you can also occupy their psyche, because you're summoning the same energies from the soil, or from the granite, or from the ocean. And part of the book and part of the film is that I interviewed ley line wizards. I interviewed Barbara Miller, who was Hamish Miller's widow, who's 90, and came out, and we were scrambling over the rocks at Zennor, dowsing the ley line, the Michael line, and of course they wrote a book called The Sun and the Serpent about this very thing, about how the spirits can emanate from the earth, and that's also my contention, and why the Nazis were so interested in this particular area, because we were involved with ley line wars, with and occult wars with the Nazi occultists and our occultists. And of course, I know that you're interested in Dion Fortune, and Dion Fortune was very much part of that complicated esoteric research web. It's quite difficult to get information, Josie, because as many people know, a lot of occultists and people like Dennis Wheatley, Crowley, Ian Fleming, just so many of them were all involved with British military intelligence. And this has been going on for some time now, going back to John Dee and Edward Kelly. I mean, that was really when MI5 and the intelligence networks were established, when you had occultists working along with the politicians and the military. So these ley line wars that have been going on, I mean, Himmler had his own dowsers, and he had his own Rasputin figure in the terms of a guy called Willigut. And of course, we had all the ladies that were employed at Bletchley Park. They would employ witches and psychics, people like I don't know whether Fortune was actually involved with military intelligence, but I'm sure she was in some capacity, even if it wasn't what she was aware of. But people like Gardner, Crowley was massively involved with these rituals, and of course a lot of the psychic warfare that was going on. They were tapping into each other's ley lines because ley lines represent the Earth's energies. So one of the reasons that Ribbentrop was here in the 30s, was taking study in the Zennor and the Cornish coastline, is that if you can control someone's energy fields, electromagnetic fields, especially when there's lots of granite, as there is here, you can control the energy field. So the Nazis would maybe build their concentration camps on certain ley lines, and here we were doing the same. I mean, a lot of it goes back to I'm not going to go into Freemasonry at this point, but a lot of the banks in someone like the City of London would be built onto existing pagan ley lines, and they would get dowsers in and mystics in and psychics in to find out where and of course they'd build these banks in order to suck as much money as they can out of the matrix that they create. So again, we're into that realm of their perverting the natural energy lines and controlling them. And of course, when you try to control these energy lines, sometimes nature fights back, and so it's a very complicated web, and you won't really get that much information because a lot of it would have been redacted by I've done some research on I found out even Crowley down here, he had a child here, and he had a coven in Mousehole, and I now regularly go to dinner with in the house where Crowley had a child by a woman called Pat Doherty, and I've written a whole chapter in the book about that and their various involvements with military intelligence. And Pat Doherty was a psychic who could astral travel, and so she was employed as a cipher clerk in Cairo during the Second World War. So this link between military intelligence and occultism and art and literature is really one that I've become very kind of fascinated by, and those are the three themes that were pretty I explored in the book. And a lot of people don't know about the links. How webbed up they are, and even you get fake ones. I mean, the drop in the fake astrology charts all over Germany by our black propaganda team. So you get black propaganda as well. A guy called Sefton Delmer was running that. So it's very difficult to get actual information. But in Victorian times, we had a guy called Alfred Watkins, who was our Victorian dowser, and then you had Hamish Miller, who dowsed all the lines down to the Holy Land, that go through Glastonbury and St Michael's Mount and Avebury, and to all the Delphi, all the St John sites. And then the Germans were doing similar because they believed their holy lines were superior to and stronger than the British holy lines. So to a certain extent, both the Germans and the British were really in the same kind of occult groups. They were either Rosicrucians or Zionists or members of the Bavarian Illuminati. So a lot of that occult war was a war between occultists, which is why it's difficult to estimate how much influence it had on the kinetic war. But certainly the people that run most governments in the West and probably the East too do have occult beliefs. And so the whole thing about black magic is a very real phenomena, and a lot of the what we're subjected to at the moment with media, with television, with pharmaceuticals, to a certain extent, it's just one big black magic ritual.
Tell me a bit about this gypsy luck. I think we could all do with a bit of gypsy luck at this time, So how do we get it?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just something that I've always believed in it, and it's always carried me through life. I mean, when my grandmother, I was brought up by both my grandmothers because I had a very kind of fractured childhood in the sense that my father couldn't read or write, and my mother was only 17 when I was born. So they really weren't. So I was brought up both my grandmothers, and both my grandmothers were psychic. And on my father's side, she was Romany and she spoke Romany, and she was constantly telling me that I was lucky because when I was younger, all my family were very dark, and I had like blonde curly hair. So she always said, "You're an angel," and like it was kind of reinforced into me as a positive belief thing. And but I then believed it, and then I always found that I always had luck, and the more you have luck, the more you trust your luck. I think the more it happens. So, I would take incredible risks, and I always knew that they would work out. And people said to me, "Well, how sooner or later you're going to come unstuck," And I never seemed to. I always had the most amazing luck with with my health, with money, with my art, with everything really. I've gone to places with no money in my pocket and always managed to survive and meet the right people at the right time. So I think it's just probably having such a positive mindset, because when you come from a very dark background, there's really nothing worse that can happen. I mean, both my grandparents put their head in the gas oven when I was 11, age 11. And then I went to a military school where I was like, systematically beaten in order to, for them to, they did experiments on me because of certain psychic abilities. So I had a really very traumatic childhood, and it was always a situation where you just laugh through adversity. And so I don't know, you can't really transmit luck to other people, but when I do book signings, I try to do it because one of my mantras is be lucky. So when I did my Saatchi shows, which was another great success story, that was based on people defacing money. And the first piece of defaced money I saw when I was a child was when my dad found a 10-shilling note and was given a 10-shilling note, and he was a notorious gambler, and it had Gypsy Rose written on it, 240 Chepstow. And he said, what's that? I said, well, it looks like it's a horse race. So of course he said, well, let's go and put this 10 shillings on that horse. And it was 10-1. So we put this 10 shillings on the horse, and it came in. And then suddenly we got like lots of money out of nothing. And that's just one of the many things that's happened to me. And then many years later, I did a show at the Saatchi Gallery, which turned to be an absolute barnstorm. I did 2 years of defacing banknotes. And it was all based on this whole gypsy thing about that you can create something out of nothing. So all my art is where I collect bits of driftwood. We were rag and bone men. And then back in hundreds of years ago, we were hauliers. We would haul stuff out the ocean, scavenge. I got the pirate link as well. Ancestors who were pirates. So this whole thing about, you can make something out of nothing has always been with me. And I've always used it in my art. And when I sign books to people and I say, do you want me to write my motto? They say, write something. I say, well, I'm going to write be lucky because that's my motto. And they say, well, we don't believe in that superstition. And I said, well, if you don't believe in it, I won't write it. And 100% they will say, okay, write it. So I write it. And then a lot of people said, when I got your book, good things happened. So you can use that, but you can also use it for the opposite, because I said earlier about duality is that when some of my father's brothers were criminals, and they would go to the race courses and with their wives, and they'd have all the lavender, and they'd say, do you want to buy lavender, sir, or madam? And if they didn't, of course, the fear was that you put a gypsy curse on them. So, even just giving them what they call the evil eye, people are very superstitious. So inevitably, they would buy your lavender because they didn't want you to have a gypsy curse. So that's the downside of doing it, And there's been occasions when I've been almost ill-wishing people and I've had to resist the temptation to ill-wish them. And I've had curses put on me. I've had effigies of me made with pins in. I've had dead toads. I've been subject to quite a lot of witchcraft in my life because I feel as though I can counteract it with my own luck. Therefore, I feel I'm immune to it. And even like making an edition of my Zennor Spirit of Place book, I published an edition of 666 copies. And a lot of people said, oh, that's a bit dodgy, that's like tip into Satanism. And I said, well, no, not really, because I dance with the devil and I'm not afraid of it. And, and this is only going to bring me good luck. And my printer said, oh, it could be that you won't sell this book because you've got an edition of 666, and what's happened, it's sold out within weeks. So it's a way of turning all these circumstances into good luck. But I think it does involve a very positive mindset, and it's difficult to just take on that mindset.
It is sort of. I was just wondering from that, how how do you avert the likes of whenever there is sort of negative energy coming in to you, sort of that are trying to scupper your plans and curses and all kinds of sort of nasties, or even the evil eye. How do you take that off? Did you say you said that you just that your own luck would just override it, or do you send it back?
Yeah, I can send it. You can send it back. I have various mechanisms. There's physical mechanisms. I'm more a physical person than a spiritual person to a certain extent, in the sense that I've played a lot of sports in my life, and I went to military school, so I still train in the gym, and you know, if I get under attack, which I have been, even recently with this book, I went down to physical mode, and it's probably not what everyone might want to hear, but I went on a carnivore diet, and so I was only eating steak and protein, and no carbohydrates and nothing. And then I found that I could manifest what's called lion energy. So you can manifest certain energies, and it's easy for me to manifest lion energy because I'm a Leo. And so like I can go into where I can train my body, I can fast, I can get myself into like almost like warrior mode quite quickly. So I was on a carnivore diet, and then I manifested quite a lot of physical line energy. And that's at that particular time I felt that that's what I needed to ward off these challenges from people who didn't want me to publish my book anymore. But there's other energies that you can do that are more peaceful, like fasting. I do fasting quite a lot, and I dabbled with meditation and things like that. So it's just a question of the main thing is that you have to keep your own energy, your authentic energy, very high. And of course we live in a state of fear, especially now. So what they want you to do is they want you to have sheep energy. So by manifesting lion energy, I'm not advocating that people go out and start eating a lot of steak, but it certainly works for me when I need it. And of course, when they can get you into manifesting sheep energy, when you're putting on the mask, you're docile, you're compliant. Of course, then the next thing they're gonna manifest is insect energy. So you're going to be an insect. You're going to be eating bugs. There won't be any cattle or any fish in the ocean because they would have taken those away or destroyed them. So it's a question of being in nature, and keeping those energetic practices going. And I'm not necessarily one that would adhere to a lot of the Buddhist path. And I think a lot of the Age of Aquarius is to a certain extent, I think it's all a bit of another matrix to get people compliant, non-violence, and accepting it, and of course it goes back to the duality as well. So you get yourself into a blissed out state of doing yoga or meditation, and to a certain extent it's where they want you to be, because there's a vampiric energy, always been on this planet, which is very prevalent at the moment. And I think you do need to keep your energies very high and not buying into fear.
Okay, look, but Bob, thank you very much for taking the time to come and to Spirit Within the Land, and to sort of to tell your story and to talk about Zennor and your book and your film. So, look, I really appreciate your time. Bob will be joining us at an event in Glastonbury in a couple of months too. So everybody can come along and to meet with Bob, and we'll explore this some more. So look, thank you very much, Bob.
Okay, Josie.
Honoring your history, your mystery, your crystal granite, rambunctious magic, your daisy adorned glory, your steadfast embrace in the boldest of storms, your steadfast embrace in the wildest of storms. May this place always be healthy, happy sanctuary for all the free spirits who find their way here. For all the bright souls who make their home here. For all the earth and angels who come to play here. Tregerthen, home of the rowan. Thank ye kindly. Tregerthen, home of the rowan. Thank ye